Hi, I'm Ben,
And I'm Josh.
and this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. And we're back for episode 5,
Well, we're getting up there in numbers, man.
right? We're approaching half of double digits. So last time, last time I threw a joke out on you, and you missed it. And I was wondering if you missed it just because of the tempo of the discussion, or if you actually didn't know. So I'm going to give you a second chance at it.
Oh dear.
So when I said that I went to the Avril Lavigne concert in Chicago, I said that Avril Lavigne was back from the dead. And that phrase is typically used to refer to someone that was like a celebrity and you thought that they weren't, their career was over and then they have another revival. And I did mean it in that respect, but it also meant something else. So you're probably familiar with this internet conspiracy theory thing that exists where someone will like go out on Twitter or something and say that a celebrity's dead. Well,
Okay, I've heard of that happening.
she was one of the first. So back in 2011, there was this Brazilian blogger that like dug up some photo evidence and some things that had happened and started a legit conspiracy theory that Avril Lavigne, who was in the middle of producing her fourth album, died. And because she was worth so much money, they replaced her with her doppelganger.
Okay.
So some girl named Melissa something or another, Melissa Vandella, replaced Avril Lavigne, and there's silly like photo macros and stuff out there of all the reasons you should believe that in 2011 Avril Lavigne died and was replaced by her doppelganger, kind of like Padme Amidala and Keira Knightley.
All right, so you don't have to draw everything back to Star Wars,
I
especially
like
not the
this
new
theme
Star
of going
Wars.
back to the Star Wars prequels for everything.
Well, but then the only comparisons we're ever going to be making are bad. So that's one downside to that.
All right,
But so there was you made the joke that Avril Lavigne was back from the dead, and I did miss it because that joke is wrapped in layers and layers of kind of obscure knowledge, like that you're having to explain to me now. So yes, I did miss your joke. And on the other end of that spectrum is I have problems tracking celebrities anyway because I'm not a huge fan of just the entire celebrity mindset. Like my wife can tell you, I am terrible at naming celebrities. Like people I see on TV all the time, I'm like, oh, that's the guy from his name is Ryan Gosling or whatever. I'm like, no, he's the guy from that movie. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
well, the great thing about this meme is that it's come full circle to where people become self-aware of it. So, like, there's this fantastic photo macro I'll post on the Facebook page and on our website in the show notes of Avril Lavigne, of a photo of her side by side with herself of the supposed replacement with the old one, and it's just like silly stuff. Like in this photo, her hair is straight, and in this one, it's wavy. Obvious that she was, that she's a fake. Stuff like that. It's really good.
Well, this is what's great about these conspiracy theories, though, is that they just can keep going deeper and deeper. Because there's like no way that there could be a third doppelganger, and that's actually a photo with the third, and like as a distraction, like oh, the original doppelganger.
Oh yeah,
Actually, this
this is a
doppelganger.
fully fleshed out conspiracy theory. Like they went back and found proof in the lyrics of one of her songs that it's a different person and all kinds of good stuff. It's great.
Yeah, people don't ever change across time. That's not a thing that happens.
Well, you got to be honest. If you look at a photo of her 2002 side by side with herself in 2019, you wonder if she's aged.
Well, that's another thing. Like celebrities typically have money, and people with money can they can shove off the ravages of time for as long as they want.
What a great example of how you use Slack.
Yes, I have money, therefore time does not affect me.
Yeah.
If only it were that easy.
Now, last time you and I had mentioned about how when I play Magic the Gathering, when it's just me, I'm like a real spike, meaning I like to win and I play to have the most competitive decks and the best strategy. But then I talked about how it's also something we do together as a family, and when my kids are involved, it changes what I do.
Oh,
And
you see, that's actually kind of disappointing because I want to imagine you as a super hardcore spike player all the time. Like I can see you at the kitchen table, windmill slamming down the winning card on against your 8-year-old, and be like, "Yeah, that'll teach you to play some jink."
Okay, now that actually happened, and I bet some users, some listeners of this podcast right now are going, okay, so one time we used to play in Colorado Springs, and there was a real competitive Friday Night Magic scene, and we would typically get 30 to 50 players just for F&M. It was almost like a PTQ. It was so big.
Are you using a lot of acronyms here for people that aren't familiar?
Sorry,
F&M
you don't need
is,
to know that one.
Yeah, F&M is Friday Night Magic. That is like a weekly little tournament, usually local at a comic book shop or something like that. And then a PTQ is a Pro Tour qualifier, which is a very, very large event with thousands of people and very high stakes.
Yeah. So we would get a lot of people come down to our Friday Night Magic. And it just so happened one week that I built 2 competitive decks that didn't use crossover cards. And my 10, 11-year-old son and myself ended up playing against each other in the finals. And everyone was gathered around. It was like father versus son, the grudge match. And it came down to this real crucial play in the 3rd game of the match at the very end. And I just crushed him. And he played a really clever play, to be honest, that was a really good play where he played a card that he was holding that was to protect one of his creatures, and he played it on one of mine, and it prevented me from doing something that would have won me the game. And he was real happy with himself and really excited, but I had a counter to the thing that he'd played in response, and he was completely crushed and cried.
That's awesome. So then it turns into one of those lessons, like you just see the situation where, and I see it in your mind, like, okay, son, I'm going to teach you a valuable lesson about life, and,
Yes.
and here it is, and it could have gone one of 2 ways. It's either like, cleverness is rewarded, and here you go, and I'm going to let you have it because you need to have these experiences in your life, or it can go to life sucks, wear a helmet, boom, sucker.
Either when you think you got everything figured out and you've done something clever and you get stomped anyway. Yes, and that's where I went. Stomped anyway, and he still talks about it to this day. That was like 8 years ago, and he still talks about it.
Oh God, I hope that was a good life lesson and not just a traumatic experience.
He still plays. I think he forgave me. And
Does he still play against you?
Now, knowing all that, if he looks back on it, if he would say, Dad, I wish you just let me have that one. Or if he's like, yeah, I'm glad you beat me in the finals.
I'm glad you beat me in the finals. If he was 10 years old and he had won, okay, yeah. So here's the thing. That's the other part of this too, right? You're both fighting for first and second place. So the net prizes that you're going to take home that night did not change. So you could have given your 10-year-old son this great memory of like, oh, I won the whole effort of tournament. Right.
This is not about the prizes. This is about the life lessons.
Oh, life lessons, my butt.
So that's where I was super hard.
No. We're not getting off this topic just yet because I'm going to drive this home. You are a spike because you had the opportunity to let your son win F&M and have this great memory, but no, you drove the stake home and just took it away from him.
Okay, so being a parent sometimes makes you have to kind of be a bit schizophrenic. You can't just be your normal usual self. Like if my usual self was like, I'm going to stomp this kid because I'm going to teach him that life's hard sometimes. Yeah, I did that in that situation. But the fact that we were sitting there at the end with these 2 decks that neither of which were considered competitive decks in the metagame because I had to make some compromises with the cards to build the decks.
I mean, I understand that you're saying that, and that makes it a cool situation. That doesn't change the memory that the kid has. It goes from a traumatic memory, which then heals over time and turns into a funny anecdote, to what could have been, this great story. And then here's the other part of it. It could have been a great story for you, too. Like, whenever he told that story, you could have been the cool dad in the background, like, yeah, I actually had the card to beat him in my hand, but I let him have it.
Yeah, but that's the thing about something like that is you have to never, ever say that or you ruin it.
Well, that could have been like the private inside joke for you and any of the adults around, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you hear lots of different versions of this idea that becoming a parent changes the way that you behave. And I'm examining this in the context of playing a game with my kids, but there's a lot of things in my life where gaining the responsibility and the necessity to take care of other people has tempered parts of me or made me have to change my personality altogether.
Oh, wow. That's, I mean, not profound at all because like any parent will be able to tell you, well, you know what? I take that back. I'm being too mean. Anybody that doesn't have kids thinks, oh, my life's not going to change that much after I have kids. And then they just don't understand the life crippling responsibility that you take on with having kids. I certainly didn't. I remember giving you a ton of parenting advice when I was still single.
Oh man, I love looking back at all the parenting advice you used to give me.
I don't remember any of the parenting advice I gave you, but in my mind, I like to think that I've been perfectly consistent executing that plan that I gave you all those years ago.
You know what? Even if you hadn't, I wouldn't remember, Josh. I like you too much. But whenever you would give me that advice, I would always take it with the level of expertise in which it was given.
From a complete amateur?
Yes.
Quarterback.
No, I mean, I like hearing someone else's perspective and opinion. Even if it's uninformed, it's still useful to have another idea to look at. Like I said before, and I think should be a theme on this podcast, we're just making this up, man. I don't know what I'm doing.
But we're making up this conversation. We just make up everything that happens in our lives. Like it's amazing and startling that we are where we are today.
Yeah. So being a parent kind of forces you to make compromises, whether it's because you're limited in the amount of time you have or money you have, or how much, like having multiple kids makes it so that you can't spend equal amount of time with each kid, those kinds of dilemmas. And you find yourself doing stuff that maybe isn't your default.
Yeah, no, that happens constantly in my life. Like I can name like 10 things that happened this week where I compromised something on the behalf of my kids. Did you want me to go ahead and name those?
Well, I was thinking about what some of mine were, but I was wondering if those 10 things that you said, if there were any that were worthwhile recounting the story.
Not really. It's more the generic of the, I had my lifestyle and my patterns and the things that I liked to do when I was in my 20s. And then all of that still exists. Like it never goes away. I still want to do all of these things, but the ability to do them is suppressed by, well, I've got kids and their needs come first kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, just the quick example, something we might need to talk about is I haven't been able to kick the Magic the Gathering habit. I mentioned in our pilot episode 1, that those weekends that we spend in Vegas are usually the cleanse to get it all out of my system. Well, Ben, it had the opposite effect. I'm still playing and I want to play more. No. I know, it's exactly the reverse. So every night this week, I just want to come home and sit at my computer and play like an hour or two of Magic Arena, which is the online version of the game. But we still have karate class. We still have dance class. We went to a pumpkin patch last night instead. Then working on Halloween costumes, like all the things that need to happen before I get to have fun.
No wonder you're on the outs with the missus.
Well, what? I'm not on the outs with the missus. Whoever said that?
Edit.
Yeah, no, edit that out. This is going to get me in trouble.
The compromises I have to make, sometimes are just about limited resources, how much time you got. When you got 6 kids, which one do you spend time with? But I found a lot of the times my default reactions are more like derived from the fact that I didn't plan out what I was going to do, and I go back to my status as an older brother. And my natural inclination tends to be to like tease rather than to nurture.
I don't think that's an older brother thing. I think that's a dad thing. Like you always see those memes on the internet, how dads handle situations versus how moms handle situations. And I do exactly the same thing. You've heard me mention it on this podcast. One of the best parts about having little kids is lying to them.
All right, give a good example of that.
Oh, give a good example of that. All right, so one thing that I wanted to do that my wife talked me out of when our son was just first born, I'm like, I'm going to teach him all his colors wrong. I don't know if I mentioned this before. Be like, look at the sky. Isn't it so green today? It's like, yeah, the sky is so green. And then that's a long running gag that doesn't have its payoff until he comes home broken down in tears from his first day of preschool. Like, Daddy, all the kids made fun of me because I don't know they said I don't know the colors. They said green was blue. And I'm like, green is blue. I've been screwing with you for 5 years. Ha ha.
Ha ha, sucker.
Oh, what a payoff. I traumatized you for life. Woo.
Yeah.
No, so yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to lie to my kids about. But the other one is just, simple stuff. Like, the monster in the closet type stuff. Mommy goes to take care of the monster in the closet. It's like, oh, there's a monster in the closet. Oh, let's take a look. We'll turn the lights on. We'll open it up. And it's like, there's nothing in here. They'd have to come through the front door and explain the whole scenario. And then if I go in, it's like, oh, there's a monster in the closet. You just look sharply at the closet like, okay, well, let's just be really quiet. Maybe he'll stay in there. And then just creep out of the room.
Oh, geez, man. Trying
Boy,
to give your kids a complex.
I haven't done that in a while.
I've had a hard time
I got in
with
trouble
the
for it.
lies we have to tell our kids. I don't like to, and that makes Alicia uncomfortable sometimes. They're like, "What were you guys doing in the bedroom when you had the door locked?" I'm like, "Well, let me tell you," and she's like, "Shh."
Ooh, so my Legoland trip that I took this past summer, we're pretty sure our son caught us at least once. But it's one of those things that we're just not going to bring it up, and he's not going to bring it up, and he's probably too young to know what it was, and hopefully it'll just fall into one of those piles of chaff that he will never remember.
Oh, okay. So when you have 6 kids in life, you're going to get caught more than once, I think, or at least once. We'll say at least once. We got caught twice, and it wasn't something you could just not talk about. It was too direct of a confrontation.
So the scenarios are flying through my head. Like, knowing you, it was probably just a kid barged in when they weren't supposed to. But then, like, I want it to be some elaborate, like, American Pie type scenario, like in the kitchen.
Let's say one of each, and I'll let you use your imagination.
Excellent.
But then you have to have the talk with the kid. Like, well, when mamas and daddies love each other, yeah. And we've kind of wandered in an area I'm uncomfortable with for the viewership of our show, but...
Perfect. Let's talk about it more.
Yeah.
Sometimes
those kinds of things happen.
Well, let's have this leads into a very generalized conversation we can have about the talk, and because this is one topic that I have been thinking about, not a lot lately, but just like in general. That's one of those big parenting moments that you can see coming from a mile away, and so I'm trying to prepare myself for it.
So you haven't yet?
No, I haven't yet. My son just turned 7.
All right, let's hear your plan.
All right. Oh, goodness. Okay, so the plan is I'm waiting for some catalyzing event, right? Like, I don't want to hit him too young because that's weird. And then he's young to the point where he'll start telling all his friends, and then I'm that guy. Like, I'm the parent that's giving all the other kids the smut to bring home. Like, who told you that?
Sure.
Yeah, like there's a kid at my son's school that's allowed to watch, adult horror movies and just goes and recants the entire plots of these movies to.
You mean the kind that like
listen.
frequently have just a gratuitous sex scene?
No. I mean adult horror movies like It.
Okay.
Pennywise the Clown, like just.
I was thinking you meant like the '80s ones, where like Friday the 13th, where there's just horny teenagers getting slaughtered by a guy with a machete.
No, well, that's a trope in horror movies anyway, but that's a different thing. No, like, so I have to deal with the fallout of my son hearing about this. There's the killer clown that can transform and just eats people, and then I have to talk him off the nightmare ledge every other day for 2 weeks. Right. I swear, if I ever get my hands on that kid, I'm gonna beat him and the parents up. But so
Carter's
anyway,
having nightmares just from this kid recounting a watching of this thing.
Oh yeah,
wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Carter won't watch Harry Potter movies. Like it's
too scary,
too dark, too scary. Yep. So, and I don't blame him. I don't like horror movies either. I've never seen the movie It, and I don't want to hear the plot recount either. But I don't want to be that parent for my son. Having the birds and the bees talk with the second graders, and like, where did you learn all of this stuff? Oh, from some kid. His name is Carter. You know what I mean? So I want to wait until he's old enough that there's some catalyzing event where it's clear that, okay, we need to have this talk now.
And what do you think that's going to be? Like, what are you waiting for?
It's probably going to be me finding his internet search history on some of our devices.
That was not what I expected you to say.
What would you think? All right, so
okay.
I'm sure you've had the talk. What was the catalyzing event in your life?
It does. What I've found is more just kind of an ethic that I live by, where I give very straight answers. So you were kind of talking about lying to kids. I try not to most of the time. I'll get to Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy in a minute, but when it comes to the birds and the bees, it just kind of comes up naturally, as long as you don't do that thing that parents tend to do, and unfortunately comes very naturally to my wife, to kind of wince and try to change the subject. If a kid's like, well, why did that lady's tummy get all big? That's your chance. That's your opening. Like, tell it, where did that baby thing come from? Or why were those two acting like that? You just straight face give them the answer.
I get that. Oh, so I think there's two different conversations that we're talking about here, because there is the one about just the pure mechanics of it. where it's just like, oh, when a mommy and daddy love each other very much, they can have a baby, and you don't have to get into specifics at that point. That's like the stage one, like just to get that question answered, so the kid doesn't dig too much deeper. But when you talk about, I don't know about the specifics, but I don't know. The conversation that I'm going to have with my kids is not going to be so much about the biomechanics. It's going to be so much more about the emotional investment.
Yeah.
And like what an interpersonal relationship means, because
that's probably a few years off for you then.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the hard part for me growing up, was I'm an introverted person, and I'm not good with other people, and just understanding how relationships and dating is supposed to go, and how much I'm supposed to invest of myself into this other person. And just for my own emotional satisfaction and emotional health, like I had to learn a few hard lessons that I hope I will be able to, kind of blunt that spear coming at my son.
Of course. Isn't that what we all want for our kids? Look back on the painful things we went through and thought, if my parents had just warned me about that thing, I wouldn't have had to go through all that pain. So I could do that for my kids.
Well, I mean, yeah. I'm not going to say my parents did a bad job.
Of course not.
Giving me that talk. I mean, I think I was fine. I knew what needed to happen. Yeah, for me, it was a much more like, I don't think my dad is a very outgoing person, very open, overspoken, extroverted guy. I mean, he's fantastic. He is the life of every room that he's ever in. But I'm not, and I don't think he knew how to, prepare me for that kind of thing, because he just didn't have it's not his fault. He just didn't expect me to have the same kind of problems that he had.
Right.
I feel like he's going to listen to the podcast and call me and be like, what are you talking about?
There's another thing that happens with my kids that I don't know if it was deliberate, but it doesn't necessarily happen in what we would have defined as the age-appropriate time, because there's always other kids present. When you have 6 kids and they're all 2 years apart, when you're given the 8-year-old to talk, the 6-year-old is there.
So that makes the target audience hard to really focus on.
Yeah. Now, you can do the thing where you take the one kid in a separate room and close the door and stuff, but I've found that the best way to deal with talking to kids about life and the stuff that we tend to be squeamish talking to kids about is just handle it when it comes up. Don't treat it like it's some kind of secret that you need to go back into the vault to talk about.
That makes sense. Like, kids pick up on those kinds of cues.
Yeah.
Like, if you just treat it as, well, this is a normal thing that we can talk about, and just put the preface on it, like, this is a private conversation. It's not something that's openly discussed in public, but I will talk to you about it because you can come to me about anything.
Yes, exactly. So I just try to be straight with the kids about it, and when it comes up, we talk about it. Now, back to lying to kids thing, because sometimes you do lie to them. For a while, we just assumed by default that we were going to play the Santa Claus game and the Tooth Fairy game like everyone else did. But I'll never forget the day. My son was 10 years old. It was leading up to Christmas, and he asked me something to the effect of, "Dad, is Santa Claus like God?" And I realized we were having this overlap in our belief systems, where there's the make-believe game of Santa Claus and the real faith I was trying to instill in him in the existence of God.
Interesting.
And it gave me an utter existential crisis.
Well, I feel like that's an easy kill. Like, no, actually, sit down. Santa Claus is not real. Let's make this very clear.
That's exactly what happened, except I did it with all the kids. So the 2-year-old got to talk when her brother was 10 because he asked the question.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's what happened. Santa Claus died that day in the rich house.
And that ruins Christmas forever.
Well, here's what happened. We sat down and we were like, look, guys, we love you. We play. There's the world's biggest game of make-believe. Everyone's in on it. And you were crossing over from the one side to the other side. Hooray! Now we all get to be on the other side of the game of make-believe. We're still going to play the game. You're not going to tell your friends. We'll still decorate and put presents under the tree. But you're on the other side of the game of make-believe now. Isn't that great? And it went over pretty well. I don't know. Maybe they'll be scarred for life and they'll never forgive me. But it seemed like it went over pretty well.
Well, I remember that exact transition happening to me when I was younger. Like getting over to the other side of the game like you were talking about. But I got to participate with my younger siblings. So like, and that was the fun part for me of being on the other side is, I got to help put the presents out under the tree. My mom made me eat the cookies on Christmas Eve. And I remember one time, the kids at the bus stop telling my brother when he was still little, like, "Oh, there's no Santa Claus, get out of here!" And then they're making fun, and then he's like, you see the look in his face, like, "What? What are they talking about?" And like while we were on the bus, I pulled him aside, I was like, "They only think that because they don't get presents from Santa Claus."
He just thinks that because he's naughty.
Yeah, exactly. But it just being on that side of it and him not being gave me a unique perspective on it, and I don't want to take that away. That very brief time that my son's going to have when he doesn't believe, but his sister still does.
Because like any good, well fleshed out game of make believe, it has a release valve for the non-believers, a way to dismiss them.
Yeah, exactly. Like any good lie has a way around it.
Right. Just like flat earthers, which I don't think really exist, but it's this fun game people like to play on the internet.
No, I have much less faith in humanity than you do, because I believe that there are people out there dumb enough to think that that's a conspiracy theory.
No way. No one actually believes it.
Oh, there are people that dumb, Ben.
No,
I've met
it's
them.
just a game. It's just a game they play, and they get kicks out of the fact that people get so worked up over it.
I would like to believe. So this is the opposite. This is the adult version of Santa Claus. Is like, no, I believe that everyone is as smart as me, and it's just a game, and everybody plays pretend, and it's funny. I don't think so. I think the reality is there are just people that dumb out there.
I don't know. You see, there's this fine line that people walk with memes about flat earthers, where they can show kind of tongue in cheek, like I don't know if you've seen the one that shows like all the planets and the sun, and they're all round, and then Earth looks like a disc.
Yes, I've seen.
Yeah.
Well, but that might be a different thing. That is the subversion that you do when you're trying to make somebody look stupid, and like you take their side and just say the absolute, like if you're arguing with somebody and they have a stance and you want to make them look dumb, you just take their stance to the extreme.
Yes.
So I think that's what's happening there. I think there is a small population of people that genuinely believe that the Earth is flat, just like there's a small population of people that genuinely
the Earth is flat.
Name a stupid thing that people could believe, and there are people that do, Ben.
You're probably right.
So, quick spoilers for our segment that we just completed, I guess. Spoilers about Santa Claus, and then also
crap.
and then we also just lost every flat earther listener that we're ever going to have.
We need to put all kinds of warnings on this podcast. Santa Claus isn't real. We're talking about the birds and the bees, and Earth is round. So look out, people.
All right, this is iTunes. We're going to get a nasty gram from iTunes.
Okay, that brings me to bad at English, the British word of the day. So, and I think this one's great because it relates to the flat Earth conspiracy. So, When I used to be in the UK, they would do this thing where they would have a phrase that kind of referred to this imaginary situation, or maybe a real situation, that then they would draw on this metaphor in like nuanced and complicated ways that were really kind of fun and entertaining. And the one I chose today is that he tossed his teddies out of the pram. And what you're supposed to imagine when they talk about tossing your teddies out of the pram or out of the cot is a baby, maybe a toddler who's like a little bit old enough to like be in a crib still, but also old enough to like talk to you or throw a tantrum, and they would get mad and throw their toys out of their crib. So that's what you're supposed to imagine when they use this. In America, we might say having a hissy fit. And hissy.
I had a different word for that, but it wasn't appropriate, and I was trying to think of a way to phrase it. So thank you, hissy fit.
Having a hissy fit. And hissy is a great example of a fossil word, a word that we don't use by itself, but it exists inside of a metaphor, and it only is retained in the English language for that reason. Like, have you ever heard?
You know a lot more about the structure of our language than I do.
So, if you toss your teddies out of the pram, it means that you're like throwing a hissy fit. And the British would use this so beautifully because they would play on it and tease on it. Like, for instance, if you went to a meeting where a lot of people in the meeting got upset, they'd come out of the meeting, one would lean over to the other and say, "Oh, there was teddies all over the floor after that meeting."
Wow. Yeah, that's a real meta way to use that phrase.
Yeah, and it was kind of drawing on that. And you're like, well, somebody ought to hand him a few more teddies so he can throw a few more, or something like that. There would just always be ways of drawing on this when people would throw a tantrum. So our British word of the day is to toss your teddies out of the pram, or out of the cot, meaning crib. So meaning having a hissy fit.
That's several British words of the day. And I love that you can't say the phrase without slipping into the English accent. That's just wonderful.
That's one you can't. Like, if you're an American and you said he tossed his teddies out of the crib, I guess.
I could hear the struggle in your voice. He tossed his teddies out the pram. And yeah, people look at you like you're an idiot.
Yeah, exactly. But it was great. I loved it when the British would do that. So, I wanted to discuss with you. You and I kind of scratched the surface last time, and I wanted to take a turn. And I think we can alternate on these. But I wanted to ask you, what are some of your house rules that, as parents, that you have for your kids that aren't the obvious ones? I mean, like, don't touch a hot stove. That's obvious. But what are some rules in your house that aren't obvious?
All right, so, and that, yeah, you had that in the notes, and I was thinking about it when you asked me the question, like, what are some of the rules that we have? And I noticed one of the things in my house is we try not to have rules for kids and rules for adults. We try to have house rules. I think that makes it more consistent for everybody. And
I like that.
And then of course, like, most of the rules don't apply to adults because, we're adults. Like, this doesn't apply to me. Haha.
I mean, you don't have to go to bed at 7?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, or, like, if my kid says, like, oh, how come you have to stay up late? It's like, you know what I do when I go to bed? Oh, when you go to bed? No. Like, look at all this work that we have to do. I've got to do this, and we got to do this, and this. Who do you think does all that? Oh, okay, that makes sense. Okay. Then he goes to bed, and then, of course, we invariably just sit down and watch TV. He doesn't even know that.
I got to tell you a story. So when we were at BYU, my wife and I, Jairus was born, our second was born before we even left college. And so we were still living in, like, the student family housing. And one night we just accumulated... Okay.
You have opened up so many follow-up questions to this, so please finish your story.
All right. So we're in the student family housing, and we'd put the boy down to bed for the night, but he'd gotten big enough, and his brother was born. I think his brother was in the crib, so he was in a bunk bed on the bottom bunk, and he could get out real easy and come out. And we'd put him down for the night, and my wife and I had kind of said to each other, we'd been meaning to sort through all the toys that we'd accumulated because we had too many, and some were junky, and so we were gonna get rid of a bunch. So we put him in bed for the night, and we'd cleaned up and done the dish, and we were like, all right, let's do that chore we've been planning to do where we're going to clean up all the toys. Get all the match sets together and throw out the crappy ones. And so we laid them all out on the floor, and just then, we didn't realize this, but Michael had opened his door and walked out and had come into the living room, and there we were, neck deep in all of his toys. And he had this look on his face like, I knew it! I knew it. You guys send me to bed, and then you play with my toys.
Well, it's better than playing with your toys before you go to bed.
Yeah. But then we just lost all credibility, and we're like, go to bed. We're going to stay up and do boring adult things. He's like, no, you can't fool me. You're going to play with my toys.
Yeah, and that ruins it for every other kid because, like we're saying, they're on the other side of the Santa Claus conspiracy. Yeah. It's like, all right, guys, go to bed. We're going to clean the house. That's crap. They're totally lying to us. I remember one time.
Yep, I know what happens when I go to bed early.
But then he told all his siblings, and none of them believe you now.
So the number one rule, you were saying that you try to have the same set for kids and parents, but you can't do that for everything.
Yeah, you can't do it for everything. Bedtime is the obvious one. The other one is no locking doors. So that's a rule in our house. It's like, well, and it's like, don't lock doors. And that's because my daughter is going to be 5. And so she knows how to lock a door, but she doesn't understand the concept that people can't come in after the door is locked. And so there was, one instance where she locked herself in the bathroom. And so that's a scary time as an adult to have a little kid locked in a bathroom by themselves because there's so many inherently dangerous things inside the bathroom.
Right.
So it was the standard, parental roles where my wife was at the door making sure that she wasn't doing anything. You're not touching anything, are you? No, you're just standing in the middle of the room not touching anything. Like just that constant stream of control of the child's actions while daddy worked to open the door. In this case, it was, just go find one of those little skinny keys that go into the tiny hole in the interior doors and unlock it. I didn't have to dismantle the hinges or anything.
Okay. Yeah.
So go ahead.
So Alicia said something like that. She just told me a story yesterday. I'd never heard it before, but I was at work one day in Italy, and out our back porch, the second floor had a balcony that opened up from the children's bedrooms, and it was just a tile floor underneath. And my wife said she heard one of the kids shouting, and she ran outside, and my 2-year-old daughter had climbed over the railing and was on the outside of the railing, kind of teetering over the tile ground there on the second floor. And she had this dilemma where she needed to run inside and reach over the balcony to grab the baby, but she didn't want to have that moment of time. It took her to run inside and go upstairs.
Right.
Like you were saying, Nicole's sitting at the door trying to tell Jane not to, drown herself in the toilet or whatever.
Right. So yeah, that would be a tricky scenario. Here's the difference between moms and dads, because the mom probably called for help, whereas the dad, I think, would be like, "Oh, just let go, I got you."
Yeah, I'll catch you. So that's what she did. She called my oldest son to come out and stand there. So she's like, all right, if she falls off the balcony, let her fall on you because you'll break her fall. And I'm going to run upstairs.
I'm very glad. If you hadn't phrased it that way, I was going to phrase it that way. It's like, all right, stand here and catch your sister if you fall. And in your brain, you're going, stand here and, like, break your bones, not hers.
That's the way I'm sure she said it. So she ran upstairs, and reached over the balcony and grabbed her like a firefighter, just preventing someone from ending their life.
Oh, God. And you see, that's a great example of the kind of unexpected entropy that happens in your life when you have kids. The kind of crap that you just don't have to deal with when you have pets.
Like, how in the heck did the baby get on the other side of the railing on the outside of the balcony? What the heck?
My dog is my child. Like, does your dog randomly get into the attic when you're not expecting them to? Then it's not a child.
Right. Exactly. And I don't want to go too deep into that because that's a sensitivity of some of my listeners. So our number one not so obvious rule in my house is don't play with doors. Don't play with doors. I can't tell you how many times in my life I've said don't play with doors, because a door turns a tiny human being who's barely capable of standing up into like the Hulk. It is an inclined plane attached to a sharp edge with a lever.
Wow, you're right. You start thinking about that, and like a door is a predominant thing in your house that gives incredible leverage, incredible shearing force. Wow, you're right. Like I knew, like we don't play with doors either, and I tell my kids not to play with doors because you can lose fingers in a door. But I mean, so I didn't think about how dangerous doors were.
5 weeks ago, my kids come downstairs. My daughter's bleeding from the back of her head. We pull her hair apart, and she's got like a 2-inch gash in the back of her head. And we were like, what were you guys doing? And my 3 youngest kids, who are 13, 11, and 9, kind of get this sheepish look and look at me and go, playing with doors.
Oh, that's one of those great moments that you have to capitalize on, where you get to stand on your soapbox and look down on them from
and
on
say,
high and be like,
what is the number one rule in this house?
Yes.
And they go, don't play with doors.
It is a good thing that you have adults in your life who, in their infinite wisdom, have come up with rules that make sense and keep you safe.
Yep. And those are great payoffs as parents, even if it costs you a little bit of blood and 5 staples to the back of the head.
5 staples? That's a heck of
5 staples.
I know. What did they do with the door to get 5 staples?
They couldn't even recreate it. We asked them to show us. My oldest son used to demonstrate when he'd get hurt, and he would demonstrate so effectively he'd hurt himself again. So we kind of put the kibosh on that. But show us what happened, and nobody could show us what happened. But they were playing with doors, so don't play with doors. That's our number one rule.
5 staples. You would expect to have to replace the door.
I know.
I fell from 6 feet into the air and broke my fall with my head in college, and I only had to get 6 staples.
Yeah. That's what I said. Doors turn very small people into the Hulk.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's a good one. All right. Let me go back to mine. We're turning into this alternating scheme here. The other rule that we have, which doesn't apply to the kids yet, but applies to adults, is no phones at the table.
Like, do you have to put it in the amnesty box or something?
So, not quite that hardcore, though we should probably get there at some point. No, my wife and I, we have smartphones. And like anybody that owns a smartphone, it turns into just a simple habit where if you're bored or you have 5 seconds free, you just open up your default app of choice. My wife's is Facebook, where she looks at, the neighborhood Facebook feed. Mine is Reddit, where I get, all the best and worst things from the internet just filtered to me.
You get to where you do it so instinctually that you don't even realize you've done it.
Exactly. And that's why we have the rule no phones at the table, because, so we sit down for family dinner every night. And that's the time where we're going to talk to the kids and be like, how was your day? What did you do? Did you learn anything new today? And then we have conversations about our day. And it's just, this is supposed to be focused family interaction time. And so phones are just a distraction and an impediment to that.
Do you enforce that rule on guests?
No, because one, we generally don't have guests. And if we do have guests, it's usually like a large party, large enough where there's a kid's table and an adult's table, and then there's lively conversation going on. And phones are an important device to tell other people that your conversation is boring by looking at your phone to listen to them.
We now carry around this handy device in our pocket for signaling to other people at the table that they're being boring.
You, sir, tell me a more subtle and socially acceptable way of telling somebody they're being boring.
So I am aware that it sends that signal sometimes, because sometimes I'll say to someone, hang on, I'm very interested in what you're saying, but I just got this buzz and it looks like my daughter's trying to get a hold of me, or something like that. So I let them know I'm not trying to send them the you're boring signal.
So, but that's the thing. If you're not trying to send a boring signal, you preface it with, like, oh, hang on a second, I need to check this real quick. Sometimes if I really need to drive the point home, like I check my phone and the person just keeps talking, you'd be like, oh, hang on a second, I need to check this email I got 7 days ago.
No, have you actually said that? I don't doubt that you've said that, but wow.
No, like that, I don't think I've said that exact phrase. I've said things much, much ruder than... All right. You know, you have been in a situation with me where somebody was talking and like the entire group.
You're right. You have. Oh,
no. One of my favorites to point at is if somebody's being particularly boring. Especially if you're in a group setting, is to just stop them in the middle of their anecdote and be like, "Okay, sorry, you've exceeded your word limit for this story. Let's move on."
Yeah, I'm giggling now because I'm thinking back in times in the past where you've actually done this kind of thing. Well, I'm glad you guys have a no phones at the table rule. We don't really have that rule in our house, but I think it's just because it happens kind of naturally that we just don't.
Oh, yeah, of course you don't have that rule at your house because your phones still have black and white screens and you have to do the T9 texting.
All right, the number 2 rule in the rich house is no pillows on the floor. This is kind of a personal rule of mine. I never thought I'd have to have a rule about this kind of thing, but if you ask my children what the number 1 rule that Dad has in his house is, if once they get past don't play with doors, they'll say no pillows on the floor. Now, no pillows on the floor seems kind of obvious, but man, we're a like don't take your shoes off in the house kind of family. So if you think about it, you know, like the thing you lay your face on all night is one step from like whatever dog poop you stepped in on the way in the house. So
that's not how I was thinking about this rule, but I'll let you finish your story and then I'll say what my interpretation was.
But I was astonished at the extent to which children can put pillows on the floor. Like, I think I just finally reached a breaking point where this became a rule, where I was like, every single pillow in the house was on the floor. And they all have a place to go, and it's not the floor, it's the couch or the bed or in the top of the closet. But every single pillow was on the floor, and I finally couldn't take it anymore. I'm like, no pillows on the floor! And after that, it just became a rule.
Yeah, you sound like you were just like waist deep in pillows waiting from one room to the next.
Yeah, it was exactly like that. And just a couple of weeks ago, my children decided to play like the world's biggest game of The Floor is Lava. They had pillows on the floor in the bathroom.
Oh, all right, so kill it with fire.
Yeah.
That's not a pillow anymore, that's trash.
No pillows on the floor.
All right, so when you first said that, no pillows on the floor, and I read that rule, I figured, okay, that's because you have a pillow on the floor. The first thing that you're going to do is jump from a high place onto the pillow to see how well it breaks your fall.
My kids aren't that kind of kids. That's what you or I might have done.
My kids are definitely that kind of kid.
Yeah. Now the floor is a soft, downy place where I can jump from the highest surface in the room.
Well, and that's the thing. It wouldn't start that way. They would put the pillow on the floor, and then they would probably like flop over from an upright sitting position straight back onto the pillow and be like, "Oh, that broke my fall." And then you would see the gears start to turn, where they would stand up like fully erect and then fall onto the pillow. That broke my fall again, and then they would just keep increasing the height of the fall as a kind of scientific experiment that you can be
not thinking about the logical conclusion of that line of behavior. Like, yes, when I reach the fail point, what is that going to look like?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so this is off topic, but this is one of my. I stumbled across this theory years and years ago, and I think this is the difference. What separates an adult from a child, and what causes midlife crisis. It's this unified theory of existence that explains everything. Are you ready for it? It's going to blow your mind.
Sure, go for it.
Okay, my theory is that the older you get, the farther into the future you can predict, which then, like, and which as a byproduct creates responsible habits and just this idea of duty and responsibility. And then a midlife crisis is the point in your life where you can look so far ahead that you're dead.
Okay. You develop this ability to predict into the future, and when you suddenly come to the realization that far in the future is the rest of your remaining life on Earth, then you have a crisis.
Well, I think let me try to explain it better. I think like there's a point where when you're a kid, you can start looking into the future, and it's only like 1 or 2 seconds.
Right.
Right. Like don't touch the spiky plant. But then as you get older, you can look farther and farther and farther into the future. So like you're a preteen, you can see maybe a day or two, and you start looking forward to your birthday or for Christmas. And then you get older than that, and you're like in college, and you start thinking about the time when you're not going to be in college and you need a job. And then you have a job, and you start looking like, okay, well, I need a wife and kids, and like this is going to be like the 5-year plan or whatever. And like that time frame that you're looking forward just keeps extending as you get older.
Yeah, I love this theory. In fact, I have a very similar theory that sounds much the same that Alicia's probably like, yeah, Ben talks about this all the time. Where I talk about how as I'm getting towards middle life, all of my experience and intelligence I have are kind of adding up to this ability to be able to predict the future. But sometimes it happens on a level that's very near term. Like, for instance, when we moved into this house, I had these really, really like bottom of the barrel movers that came to deliver our stuff. And they rolled up to our house with the truck with the crates on the back of it, all of our stuff that had crossed the ocean. And they started to back the truck up to the house. And I saw, based on the level of alertness of the spotter and expertise of the driver, that these guys were going to take out my mailbox. And I had a good 15 seconds of wisdom. Like, I was like, okay, I can see in 15 seconds these guys are going to wipe out my mailbox. And in that 15 seconds, I could have acted decisively enough to prevent it. But one, I didn't really like the mailbox that much. And two, I was curious enough that I wanted to see how it was going to play out.
Okay.
So I let it happen. And they did. They took out the mailbox, and they ended up, made a claim and paid to replace it and that kind of stuff. But I wonder sometimes when I have this experience where I can see what's going to happen in the future, and now I have to decide, what do I do with this knowledge? Like, what do I do now that I can see far enough in the future to know what's going to happen? Can I still influence other people's behavior when it isn't just me that makes decisions about it? Like, if I can see in the future for something I'm going to do, then I can change my destiny, like in Minority Report. But if I was going to try to make the movers not crash in my mailbox, I would have had to do some shouting and running and waving and stuff, and maybe I could have stopped them. That's
a good point. Like, it becomes a calculation of, okay, I can potentially change or prevent this future event from occurring, but is the juice worth the squeeze here? Like, is the amount of effort that I'm going to put into this worth the averted outcome?
Yeah.
Well, see, now it's an easy calculation these days, because with 15 seconds of warning before movers do something stupid, that's plenty of time to take out your smartphone and start filming it. Like, man, I'm going to get such great karma
I wish
for
I'd
this.
done that. You know what? I'd just gotten here, and I hadn't yet developed all the right smartphone habits. I couldn't have brought it up that fast, because I'd only just adopted a smartphone that year.
I saw a comic online, and this is my favorite parenting comic I think I've seen to date. And it was just some mom, like at a Chuck E. Cheese or something. She's like, "Where is my son?" And then the speech bubble comes in from off the panel, like, "Mom, help!" And she turns, and her son has somehow gotten himself completely all the way into the claw machine, like with all the stuffed animals, and he's banging on the glass. And then she like, "Oh my gosh, I have to do something." And she pulls out her phone, and then like the last panel is like one half of the phone says dial 911, and the other half just says camera. And then she goes, "I don't know what to do."
Of course you know what to do. Film it.
Yeah, you take a couple of, like, if it's all right, so this is the difference, right? Everybody does the same thing. It's the sequence that changes. If it's mom, you call 911, and then you take a couple of pictures while the ambulance is on the way. If it's dad, you take a bunch of pictures, make fun of the kid, and then maybe you call emergency services if you don't just get him out yourself.
Right. Yeah, I think it's pretty accurate. So have you ever watched the YouTube channel Smarter Every Day?
I've seen a couple of their videos.
So Destin Sandlin, who is the guy from there, did a podcast, and he worked for a long time as an engineer for the Army Research Lab, doing like rockets and stuff like that. Anyway,
the Army Research Lab has all the coolest and dumbest projects because the Army will just fund anything.
So it was like that, and he'd been with them for a decade or two, and he was on a project one time. We had kind of a young project team, and he explained this exact thing that I was describing, where they got together, they had a problem they were going to try to solve, and he realized he could see into the future and realize what the solution to the problem was going to be, but that a new team would need to kind of go through a bunch of solutions to arrive at it. And he says, look, guys, I can tell you right now, you're going to look at this solution and this solution and this solution, but in the end, what we're going to end up doing is this one, and that's the right answer. Let's just skip all that and go straight to the answer. Well, in that kind of situation, what you're doing is you're drawing on a non-existent relationship to get a bunch of strangers to trust you,
Right.
that you're wise on something. And ultimately, he wasn't able to do it. He said it took him like 3 days. They tried all the wrong solutions and ended up with the solution that he told them was the right one 3 days later. And I heard him tell this story to a friend, and he described it as like a failure on his part. Like, I failed. I failed to save us those 2.5 extra days of effort to arrive at the right solution. And he's like, sometimes you can't shortcut that stuff. The part of the ability to build the team and have everyone work together towards the common goal is to get them to all agree on the end, and they didn't trust you enough to just let you shortcut to the end.
I love how in all of your examples of this ability to kind of look into the future and see what's going to happen, you're always focusing on like, okay, how can we optimize it? How can we save ourselves? How can we fix this broken process? And what's funny is like I have this ability too, and I've manifested it at certain times throughout my professional career. And without doubt, every single time I did, I only changed my actions to benefit my own reputation. So here's an example. I remember one day sitting in the flying squadron, and we got an email saying that the squadron leadership had decided that they didn't like the instructor program, that the program that they send pilots to become instructor pilots, they didn't agree with, or they didn't like how they were doing certain things, and so they were going to stop sending people to the instructor upgrade program until it was changed. And so I remember reading that email and then immediately turning to my peers in the room and being like, all right, everybody see this email? Okay, I'm going to make a prediction right now that in 6 months we're going to have a severe shortage of instructors, and it's going to turn into an emergency, and we're going to have severe training issues because we just don't have the manpower to do this stuff.
So in that situation, you're not going to influence the outcome. You're just giving yourself credibility because in 6 months your prediction is going to come true.
Exactly. And in 6 months, guess what happened? Exactly what I said was going to happen. And then, like, it's just, I remember the look of awe of a couple of the younger guys, like, how did you know that was going to happen? And I turned to them, like, because I used my brain and I thought about the logical outcome of this decision. Like, you should do the same thing.
Yeah, and that gives you influence in kind of your inner sphere. Sometimes
Right.
I look at a situation like that and I think, no, let's not have that 6 months and a crisis at the end. Let's fix it now while we can see what the outcome's going to be. Let's stop them from crashing into the mailbox.
Yeah, but sometimes, like, so there's multiple outcomes, right? Either them crashing into the mailbox is just going to be so darn funny that you want them to happen. You want it to happen anyway.
This seems interesting. Let's see where this goes.
Sometimes, like what Destin said, you just don't have the resources, be it emotional, political, or physical, to alter the outcome, and so then you have to look for alternate ways to benefit from the prediction. Which, in my case, I was able to make other people look like fools and gain credibility with my peer group by making the prediction without having to alter the outcome.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like that feels like the next developmental step for me. Like if I want to level up my avatar at this point, the next thing for me to do is the next time I have this experience where I see what the future is going to be, should I be using that to change the outcome?
So this is the thing that you always have to remember, is that whenever you think you know what's going to happen in the future, you have to develop your list of the different courses of action. You're going to want to zero in and focus on what you think of as the most optimal, but you also need to consider the alternatives, including taking no action, because taking no action is always a course of action.
Yeah. So if I'd run around and waved my arms and yelled at the movers and they hadn't crashed into my mailbox, the opportunity cost is pretty low there. What, they'll just think I'm a jerk and bossy. I don't know, maybe they deliberately drop my piano on the corner or something like that. I don't know what the opportunity cost is there.
Yeah, that would be... you're assuming very malicious movers. I don't know. If you had done that, you probably would have looked like the overbearing guy, like, oh, just let us do our job. Because if you stopped them from hitting the mailbox, guaranteed they would have told you, no, we never would have hit the mailbox.
Yeah, we never would have hit the mailbox. Exactly.
Who is this guy getting in our grill? Yeah.
Yep. And that's
So
how it feels like when you're a passenger in a car and you tell someone to look out for something. You never know if you telling them gave them just the right amount of attention that they prevented a disaster. But of course, since it doesn't happen, you'll never know.
Usually, when I see that stuff coming, I don't say anything. I just brace because I know like there's.
Oh man.
Well, this is a different scenario, right? Like a lot of times in a car, like if the time it takes for the driver to process what you said, bring their attention to what the thing is, like analyze their course of action, and then come to the same conclusion that you did, like it's already too late. Everything's happening too fast.
Yeah.
I remember sitting at a stoplight at the bottom of a hill one time, like a completely empty road with this red light, and then there was this person coming up behind us in my rear view, like full speed. They had no clue that this light was red, and we were stopped in front of them. And I just like I'm looking at the rearview mirror, and my shoulders just kind of went up, and my teeth started gritting. And my wife goes, "What's going on?" I'm like, "Don't worry about it." And then you just start hearing this screeching as the person slammed on the brakes and locked up their tires. And they didn't end up hitting us, but like they could have.
Whoa.
But they always say that like if you're braced in that situation, it's way worse than if you just didn't see it coming. Like,
so that's why you didn't tell her what was happening?
Yeah, because and imagine like you say like if you're looking in the rearview mirror and say what's going on, like this guy behind us is going to hit us. What's she going to do? She's going to turn around, and now she's going to be her shoulders are going to be 90 degrees to the airbag. Her head is going to be 180 degrees.
Disaster.
Yeah, that's bad. Like,
and the way you describe it
sweetheart,
you sound like a jerk.
Well, and I tend to I have a self-image. I like to come across as a jerk. Like I'm probably actually a nice guy, but it's easier if people expect me to be a jerk. Expectations management for the world, Ben. If the world expects me to be a jerk and I'm a nice guy, they're pleasantly surprised. If the world expects me to be a nice guy and I turn out to be a jerk, then they're mad at me.
So I told you I had the same thing where I saw somebody coming up behind me at 60 miles an hour and not going to stop. There was a traffic jam, and I ultimately decided to go off onto the median, and they skidded to a stop right where I had been. And I thought about what if they'd hit the person in front of me? Like, would I be accountable for the fact that they hit them instead of me because I got out of the way?
Oh, geez, absolutely not. Like, it's always like, even if they had hit you, it's their fault.
Wow.
Rear-ending accidents are incredibly easy. It's always the person behind you's fault.
Well, to bring this back to kids and our house rules.
We went far afield on this one.
Yeah. My third one that I have on my list is don't forget, make good choices. And I have it in quotes because when I deployed to Afghanistan in 2011, somebody gave us like one of these, your daddy's going on deployment kits. And in it was this little like elephant teddy bear, and inside was a voice box that would record your voice.
I've heard of those, and you're like they're especially for like infants or little kids, so they don't forget your voice while you're gone.
Yeah, and I had in 2011, my daughter was newborn; she was like a year old.
Aww.
And so I took the little thing, and that's what I recorded it saying. It was a little elephant, and I thought, what do elephants say? Elephants never forget. So I said, don't forget, make good choices. And that's become a slogan in our house. It's like the kind of thing you say to the kids when they're like going out the door to go on a field trip or something like that. Don't forget, make good choices. So we can do that like a challenge response kind of thing. If you say one half to any of my kids, they'll say the other half.
That's funny because I feel like you would need multiple elephants for different age groups. For example, like if I had a newborn daughter and I was going to deploy, I think I would put on just my voice and just the generic, don't ever forget Daddy loves you. Just something simple like that. And then for the older kids, I think my recording would be something along the lines of, whatever you're thinking about doing, dial it back 5 notches.
Yeah, like Tony Stark to Peter Parker in the back of the limo.
Yes.
There's a space there between... Yeah.
No, one of my favorites was the new Spider-Man movie, Far From Home, where he gets the glasses. It's like, what was the name of the acronym for the glasses? Edith. Yes. Even dead, I'm the hero, and it's just I love that. Like, that is so perfectly like the character
name
they've
for
come
Tony
up with.
Stark.
Yes, it's like even beyond the grave, I'm going to get my digs in.
Yeah.
Love that.
Do you guys have any of those challenge response style things that you say in your house?
So this is interesting because you brought up two different things that I want to talk about. One of those was, like you said, don't forget, make good choices. That's less of a rule, and that's more of like something that you cross-stitch into a pillow and just have in the house. Yeah. We have those too. I don't think any of them are appropriate, though. Those are mostly between me and my wife, and they're we're not going to go there. But the challenge response thing, we do have one of those, and it is absolutely a rule, and we've used this out in public. And our challenge response is, we will say, you get what you get, and then the kids are supposed to respond with, and you don't throw a fit.
Yes.
And that evolved around primarily food. Like, oh, I didn't want this. Like, well, you get what you get, and then yes, and then we don't throw a fit, and they sit and they eat it. Because one of the things, at first, of course not, but now yes.
Well, good.
It's one of those things you've got to
expectation.
Yeah, that's one of those things you have to physically beat into a child's head that you will eat what you are given. Period. Dot. And like it's one of those. This is one of those trust relationships, like we were talking about earlier, that we've tried to develop with our kids, because we decided very, very early on that we don't want our kids to be picky eaters, because that just makes your life as a parent so much more complicated and difficult. No, we can't go to this restaurant because there's nothing on the menu that our kids like, or we can't have this dinner because the kids won't eat it. You know what? If my kid just eats what he gives him, regardless of the circumstances, it just makes my life logistically more easy. So it's a battle, though. When they go through the stage, they all do, and it's right about 3 years old where they realize that they can refuse. Like, no, I don't want to eat this. And so there was like a couple of months with each of them where they would refuse to eat something that we'd give them. And it's just like, that's what you're getting. Like, I don't want this. Like, well, then you're not going to eat. Go straight to your bed and stay there until you're willing to eat this. And we would let the food get cold and congeal on the plate and just leave it there. And they would inevitably, after, like, we knew the point when we broke them, because the first couple times they would just go to sleep and just go to bed without dinner. But there was that night when they would come back, tail between their legs, like, are you going to eat? Yes. And then they would eat the cold, congealed food. And then after that, it's just so much easier. And they don't really complain about food anymore. And then we go out to places, we go to other people's houses, we go to restaurants, and they always have something that they're willing to eat.
This sounds like a person without commitment saying this, but I feel like that there's a non-overlapping set of children who can have that outcome and ones that cannot. Like,
so you think your proposition is that there are children, regardless of how hard you push, they will just refuse to eat the certain thing.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm very aware of the fact that parents who like give in or are inconsistent are just teaching children that they can be more bullheaded than them and win the battle that they want. And there's a rule I don't have on my list. It's that consistency is king. And if you're consistent, children will get the message. But I feel like with eating, there's certain kids that just aren't going to give in.
Well, I mean, there is a difference between, like, for example, my son doesn't really like cheese. Like, he'll eat cheese if we have cheese as a part of, if it's in a meal. Like, if the cheese is in this meal, he'll eat it. But he's not going to eat, like, a cheese quesadilla. That will never be his number one pick for food. So I think there's that fine line between, well, he refuses to eat this and he doesn't like this. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And then to go back to what you were saying with the non-overlapping set of children that will and will not respond to this type of development, you do have a much larger sample size than I do with your kids. So I imagine you're probably more of an expert on this than I am.
Yeah, so I'm going to impart some wisdom here, because I tried the other day on my brother and it failed. He'd gone on Facebook and he was like, I'm sitting here at the table with my 3-year-old and we're having a battle of wills and I'm going to sit here as long as it takes until he eats this thing. Kind of what you described. And right. He kept, my brother almost never goes on Facebook, and he texted again like an hour later. He's like, still at the table, still haven't eaten it. And he did again like an hour later. So it had been like 3 hours that he was sitting at the table with this kid trying to teach him this lesson. And so I wrote to him, I'm like, look, bro, I love you, and let me tell you, one of the best things I ever did for my relationship with my kids is I decided to stop fighting the food battle. And I know this goes against what you're saying, because you're right, there are a whole bunch of complications that go along with having a picky eater for a kid. But I think aside from just pickiness, that there are certain things that kids don't like you said with Carter and cheese. And once I stopped fighting the fight, I didn't realize I'd done this, but one day I just decided, I don't know how, decided to stop fighting it. My oldest daughter, who is probably my pickiest eater, maybe 3 or 4 years later, she said, about 3 years ago, my dad stopped fighting me and trying to make me eat stuff, and I like him a lot more now.
That's emotional terrorism, and girl children are very good at that. That's
but it was so effective because I reflected on it. I thought, she's right. I just stopped picking the fight about this. I just quit. Like, I'd put the food on the table and she would just decide not to eat. And this is when she was older. She would, there was no sending her to her room. She would just sit there, look at it, not put any on her plate, and then leave. And she, that's all it was. But when I stopped trying to make her eat it, then it removed this naturally occurring adversarial aspect of our relationship that occurred during the same time of day when we were supposed to be having our only face-to-face, talking to each other, having a nice relationship part of the day, and turn it back into a nice part of the day instead of an adversarial part of the day.
Well, and like you were saying, it is different when the kids get older. So, I mean, right now, my kids have absolutely no control over what they're going to eat because it's just, whatever we're going to give them. When they get older, that dynamic might change. Like, their preferences might be more of a factor in what we decide to do and what not to do. But going back to your brother, and I think that he probably lost that battle not because he is... I'm assuming that. Did he lose that battle, or did the kid end up eating?
It's kind of early on. Like you talked about how with you and your kids, it took a couple of months before they would come out and just eat it. He was blogging when it was the very first occurrence, so I don't know yet. Got it.
Well, I'm going to proposition that he's not doing it the most effective way, because if he's sitting there at the table with the kid trying to make him eat, then it is just a straight battle of wills. Who's going to get bored first, or how long do I really want to sit here? What you got to do is make it much, much worse for the kid.
Yeah, the kid's got less to lose.
Oh yeah, no, you get up and you leave. You start watching TV or something, and like if they come out or whatever, did you eat your food? No, go sit back at the table. But I don't want to. It's like, well, then eat your food. Like, I'm out here having fun doing whatever I want because I'm done. I ate. Like, this is your fault. You're doing this to yourself. That's how you have to cage these things. Like, it's not you versus them. It's like, you're putting yourself in this terrible situation. I'm just implementing the rules, guy.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I just found that when I stop fighting the fight, it's better. And there's compromises. There's a big difference between a kid that just like has a list of 4 things they'll eat and nothing else, or a kid that is mostly reasonable most of the time and just has 1 or 2 things they don't like, and I'm not going to fight the fight with them about those 1 or 2 things.
That's definitely true. There is a threshold where if there's the kid that refuses to eat almost everything, and then there's the kid that just has a couple of things that they prefer not to have.
Yeah. What was yours when you were a kid?
What, not eating?
Yeah.
All right, so I can only remember one instance, because I wasn't a very picky eater when I was a kid, but there was one time we were at my grandparents' house it's Mare up by Prescott. You don't care about those details. Oh, God, storytelling as you get older. We need to talk about that. I was sitting down at breakfast, and my dad had made fried eggs for everybody, and he had made over easy, so that, you could cut into it and the yolk would kind of run out.
Yeah.
And that's how he prefers his fried eggs. I don't. I prefer my eggs over hard, where everything is just a consistent, solid mass. But at the time, like, I was too young to articulate that. It's like
I don't like it.
Exactly. It's like it's not that I don't like eggs, it's that I don't like eggs this way. And it turned into one of those, like, well, everybody else is gone and I'm sitting at the table forced to eat this. And it wasn't bad. It's not that I didn't like it. It's that it was just kind of runny and gooey, and I just didn't like the texture, the feel of it. I ended up eating all of it, and I just didn't have the tools in my vocabulary to explain, Dad, if you put this back on the skillet for 15 seconds, I will eat every bite of it and then more.
And so it turned into a battle, and your inability to articulate to him what the problem was made it come back on you?
My inability to articulate the problem made me lose the battle.
Yeah.
Because my dad's a very willful person, and he implemented the same "you're going to eat" kind of policy, at least with me. I don't know what happened with my brother or my sister, but I eventually I don't remember exactly my thought processes, obviously, but I guess the cost-benefit analysis swung to the other side, and I just choked down what I thought was gross eggs at the time, and then went about with my day.
Well, like you, I was not a picky eater as a child either, but I remember things I didn't like as much, like avocados, that now I completely, devour and love. But there was one thing that I still don't love to this day, and that is squash. Man, I hated squash as a kid, and my parents made it so much.
Which kind of squash? Just any squash?
Any squash that's not a pumpkin, I think.
Oh, so pumpkins are... Wait, are pumpkins squash?
But you don't prepare Yeah, they're all part of the same, gourd family with like, stringy seeds in the center and like a fleshy outside that can be eaten, I guess, if you are into that kind of thing. But man, I hated it. I hated squash as a kid, and my parents would make it all the time. And so that's one of those things that when you become a grown-up, you just have the luxury of, we're never eating that ever again because I'm the one that does the shopping.
Yeah, you see, and you just... It never even enters into your vocabulary or the problems that you have to deal with. Food that you don't like because you just don't get it.
And it's funny how many of those rules we have that are about food and children, because we have all the usual rules about like not bringing food into their bedroom because they forget it's there and like gets rotten or they spill or whatever. So we only eat in the kitchen in our house. But I understand some houses, like the floor plan, there's no clear line between what's the kitchen and what isn't, or how close you are to the TV. That tends to be a bit of a stressing point in our house. But one thing that consistently became a problem, I thought I would never have to make a rule about, I ended up having to make a rule about, is transferring juice into containers it doesn't belong into. Man, my daughters, I don't know, but they're trying to make juice pops in ice cube trays. They're trying to fill their water bottles with juice. They're trying to put juice into like little syringes, or I don't know, just all kinds of nonsense. And without fail, there's just a never-ending sticky floor stretching from the freezer to the sink to the living room. And they, even if they know they did it, they never clean it up enough. They like do a half-hearted wipe with a wet rag, and it just spreads it out so that more of the floor is sticky. Oh my gosh.
Oh, well, that's another rule. Like, I didn't write it down, but this is another rule that we have. It's do it right or do it twice.
Oh.
It's like I mean,
adding that one to my list. I like that one. Do it right or do it twice.
Yeah, that is a rule that I remember getting pounded into my head when my dad made me and my brother wash his truck once, because we were just wanted to go play, and so we did it, with half of our butts. And
how old? I liked your version. How old were you?
Trying to keep it PG.
Yeah.
I don't know. I couldn't have been older than like 10 or 12 or something. And like, so he had us. It was easy. It's not rocket science. You just wipe it down with a cloth out of a bucket. But we did it so poorly. And then he pointed out at the end, it's like, look at this. Does this look clean? No. Well, then do it again. And he made us wash that truck probably 3 or 4 times that day. But I remember that as one of the sticking points in my head of, well, if you do it right the first time, then it's done and you can be done with it. So that's one of the rules that I try to implement with my kids. Like, oh, go clean up your room. I'm like, is it clean? Yes, it's clean. You go in there and it's just, my son's version of clean is still, there's nothing on the floor. It's now all on tables. So it's the same mess, just in piles across those little play tables that we have.
And to him, he feels like he spent a lot of his time doing something productive.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, how is this not clean? There's nothing on the floor. I'm like, okay, well, we need to expand your definition of clean. And you need to do this right the first time, because I don't want to keep coming back in here. Again, and then you cage it as like, this is your fault. Like, you're still doing this because you didn't do it right the first time. So, and I'm going to go back and watch TV, and then I'm going to inspect it again when you're done, and you're just going to spend more time doing this thing you don't want to do. My
wife frequently articulates the ethic you just described that your father has, where if you want to teach your kids something, you have to be committed enough to make them do it twice. And what's kind of being said there in between the lines is that as the grown-up, you have to... this costs you extra time up front, but it's an investment.
Yes, and that's exactly right. It's an investment.
Like, if he's going to make you guys wash the truck twice, he could have just let you get away with doing it crappy the first time and then not have to spend any more of his time on you guys. But he wanted to invest in boys who can do a job right the first time, so he was willing to invest the time to watch. And I assume he supervised a bit more the second time.
He supervised the first time, but he didn't say anything until it was over and done with.
Wow. He waited for you guys to get finished, and then like, all right, you suck, do it again.
All right, but again, in this, I must have learned this from him. You make it worse for the kids than it is for you.
Sure.
So when we're talking about supervising, and you can't see, but I'm doing air quotes. I mean, he had one of those folding lawn chairs and a small cooler with beer
and an
was
umbrella.
watching us wash his truck.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he totally relaxed, just chilling on a weekend.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's hard when you're like trying to teach a kid how to like clean a toilet right, because you can't just say go back in there and do it again. You got to go in there and bend over the toilet with them and show them how to do it right.
Yeah,
I mean, it takes longer to do it that way, but once you have invested in a kid enough that they know how to do it, then it pays off.
No, I agree, but at the same time, we've all had those moments where you're elbow deep in something, and the kid comes up and says, "Okay, I'm done," and you can see clearly that he's not done.
Yeah,
and you just make the compromise that moment where sometimes I even tell my son, like, "You didn't do it right, but I'm going to let you get away with it this time because I'm swamped with other things to do.
Yeah.
We will come back to this."
The kid says, "Okay, I'm done," like it's a question. Like they're saying, am I going to be able to get away with this level of effort?
Oh, because they know. And that's just human nature in general. Of just like being told to do a task, and you will naturally, subconsciously feel out the lowest level of effort that you can put into it and still get away with it.
So I thought I was done making up these stupid new rules for my kids, but I made up a new one just like a month ago that I've been enforcing since then. It's no saying stop it. Because my daughters were starting to play this game where like one of them would do something and then the other would be like stop it, and they were like stop it and stop it, and it would turn into this like slapping and playing back and forth, and I couldn't take it. I was like, so I realized the only way to end this game was to outlaw saying stop it. And I was surprised how effective that was at stopping the game.
That's interesting.
In fact, my 13-year-old son, who we tease is the most passive-aggressive person in our house, I asked them all to come up with creative ways to say stop it without actually saying stop it. And he was like, when people do the kind of thing that they're doing right now, it just really makes me upset inside.
Wow. That's like you said, that's a very passive-aggressive way of making somebody feel bad. But yeah. I'm glad you brought up that distinction, though, because that is the first place my brain went. It's like, you don't outlaw words. You just change the rule to you can't say the same phrase twice in a row. So then now
nice.
Yeah, so now it fixes you don't want to hear the stop it over and over thing, and it turns it into a fun language experiment to expand their vocabulary. How creative can they get? Because after 3 or 4 iterations, they're going to run out.
Yeah. And then it turns it into like a fun game that isn't this like deteriorating situation that's potentially becoming violent.
Stop it! Cease! Desist your activity! Like, that's it, I'm out.
Yeah, it becomes so silly after a second that it doesn't go in the escalation direction.
Exactly. Yeah, it could actually de-escalate. Like, what did you just say? And then like get a dictionary out or have to go ask mommy about the phrase, and they forget what they were fighting about.
So you had one on your list about the chain of command. I want to know what that's all about.
So that's like a rule and a running gag in our house. So like it's this joke that Nicole is anybody that's met my wife, like she is a very strong personality person. Very stoic, she has everything together. She knows what she wants out of life and she's going to get it. Very quiet, underspoken, just a great person, and I love her to death. Great personality, just everything about her is just wonderful. But like everybody that knows her and knows me, like they know who's in charge, and it's Nicole.
Oh, okay.
No, it's definitely not
all
me. Right. And that's kind of the joke. I remember we made it clear with our kids, like the chain of command. It's like, and I tell them constantly, listen, mommy's the boss, and then I'm number 2.
So they can't play one against the other because there's a clear person at the top of the chain of command.
Exactly. There is no go ask mommy, go ask daddy, because it's like if they ask me, it's like, well, what did mommy say? Well, I didn't ask her. Well, mommy's the boss, go ask her. And then like if mommy says, oh, go ask your daddy. Like if they ask me and did you ask mommy? Yes. Like, okay, well then clearly she sent you to me, because otherwise you're just in a world of pain if I find out she didn't. But like we'll be out at places. I remember being at my parents' house once for a family gathering. Nicole wasn't there at the time. She was coming in from work. She had to work late and was on her way. But I remember it's like, oh yeah, my dad's like, shouldn't you be the boss? Like, isn't it the king of the castle? And then I looked at him for a second. I looked at my kids. I go, hey kids, who's the boss at home? And they both go, well, mommy's the boss. And I look at my dad like, yeah, you see? This is how it is.
So, nope.
Yeah, no, absolutely not.
Now, have you ever sent the kids and say, go ask your mother, and she gets upset about that?
We haven't had too much of that, honestly happen yet. I imagine it's going to be a bigger problem when they're asked when they have more privilege or they want to go out and like do things away from the building and need prior permission. Because right now everything that they do is in the house, so they don't really need permission to do a lot of stuff. Like they need the most permission they need is if they want to build a pillow fort in the living room.
So this rule absolutely would not work in my house. Because I don't know if this is just a symptom of how many kids we have, but Alicia absolutely does not like to make all of the parental decisions. It fatigues her, and she wants to be able to have me do that sometimes. And we don't have a clear rule about when I'm the one that's in charge and when she's the one that's in charge. But luckily, when she delegates the responsibility, she also delegates the consequences for the decision. So
that makes sense. Yeah,
she's not going to give me a hard time about what I chose to do if she chose not to be the one to be in charge.
Right, but the difference there is you don't have the clear chain of command. Who gets asked first?
Yeah, you're right. Although, as any kids do, they learn which things is dad more likely to say yes to and which things is mom more likely to say yes to, and they go to the which one they think's most likely to get them what they want.
Which is no problem when you have a clear chain of command, because my first question every time, did you ask your mother?
Yeah, if I did that, I would get in trouble with Alicia.
Which is fine. Then
she treats that like I'm delegating a chore to her. Like I'm giving her something else to do that I should rightfully be able to do without her.
Well, you see, that there's a...
That's interesting that Nicole doesn't look at it that way.
It's a trap. You see, it's a trap if you don't have the clear line of communication. Well, and there's the thing. Because we know that Nicole is the boss and then I'm number two, like if she doesn't want to make the decision or she's emotionally taxed or she's done, like I don't even want to think about this, then she just gets to defer it to me. And like you said, by deferring it to me, she's also deferring not only the authority but the responsibility.
Got it.
If you told them to come ask me, then whatever I decide goes and you have to be okay with that. I would encourage you to have a discussion with your wife about how these decisions are made. And because if it's ill-defined, then that's when the problems come. If the kids come to you first and you make a decision and Alicia disagrees with it, then it becomes a discussion and an argument then. If you have all of that up front and get it all out immediately, then everything is known.
And that's the thing about being married for 20 years. I mean, for the most part, our Venn diagram overlaps and we're very much like-minded about things. Like, it really is just about delegating the emotional burden of having to talk to a child. We both would likely say the same thing in most situations. And there are a few things where I am very different than her, and she recognizes that leaving it to me means that I would do it a way that she wouldn't want it to be done, and in those situations she doesn't like to delegate the decision making to me.
That is, yeah, I think the biggest difference between, like you're talking about, when you're married for a long time, you develop the same kind of you feel each other out, and we both know kind of where the thresholds are for what one person would accept and what the other wouldn't. But at the same time, when we're talking about where we differ, I think, is I'm willing to accept a little more danger element, I guess, into my decisions. Like if a kid asks me if he wants to go do something, I'm willing to accept a little bit higher threshold for danger or injury than she is, because I think a little bit of that in a kid's life is good. Like, you should be allowed to make decisions that you could get hurt, and like not seriously hurt, but a little hurt, just because that's a good learning opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm sure even your definitions of what constitutes the potential to get seriously hurt or a little hurt are different between you two. Like you might not necessarily be able to agree on that.
Oh, absolutely not. Like I'm not going to accept, like, could you break a bone? Well, then no. Could you maybe split your head open to go get some staples? I mean, depending on what it is, maybe I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess sometimes it includes things like Nerf sniper rifles.
Nerf sniper rifles with sharp, pointy objects on them. No, that's... Because now... Okay, anything that can cause permanent debilitations, including loss of an eye, I'm not okay with.
Yeah. Sometimes those come up by surprise.
Well, and that's a discussion. Yeah, like we're talking about high school sports when our kids get to the age where they can start doing sports. Like I played football in high school, and I don't think it was a problem. But I don't think I'm going to let my kids play football in high school for no other reason than there is the very small chance that they can have permanent damage sustained from that sport.
Yeah, like permanent joint and limb problems that plague them throughout their life.
Yeah, and I'm more worried about like a concussion, like anything that happened that impairs your mental capacity. Because let's face it, if you're not going to be a professional athlete, I mean, you don't necessarily need to be in perfect physical condition. Everybody's got those little tweaks. Like I've got kind of a bum knee in certain times. Those aren't too bad because I still have my brain. I can still sit at my desk and go to work and be productive and earn a living. But if I was to take a blow to the head where now all of a sudden I can't do math, that's a serious problem.
Yeah. So along those lines of like the kind of things that fit within people's dangers threshold, obviously for a parent, a father might see it one way, a mother might see it another way, but a kid sees it another way entirely, and they may not involve the parents in the decision-making process. I remember when Michael was 7, we lived on base on Langley Air Force Base, and the house next to us was vacant and a little bit run down, and he and some friends had gone over there, and there's like a 6-foot privacy fence dividing the property, and some of the fence boards had fallen off, so they have nails protruding from them, and there was some like loose bricks around, and they fashioned a brick catapult, which is as dangerous as it sounds, out of boards with nails sticking out of them and bricks. We're like,
now, hang on. A catapult is only as dangerous as the ammunition that they were using.
Right. So rusty nails and bricks.
That's what they were launching? I thought it was made of rusty nails and bricks.
Yeah, and they were launching bricks. So they basically set a brick fulcrum and then a board with a rusty nail sticking out of it, and then one kid would jump on the board with a brick on the other end, and then the brick would go flying through the air. And of course, the trajectory of the brick is in the path of the kid that jumped on the board.
Of course. But so this is the kind of thing, this is the apparatus that you build that makes you a legend in the local neighborhood.
It absolutely
Did you see that thing that Jarris built in his backyard?
A brick catapult. So the only thing about this was these are the kinds of things that parents never know about unless something goes wrong. So the fact that I know about it means that something went wrong.
Somebody got hit in the face with a brick.
Yeah, not a brick, a rusty nail. But yes.
Ooh.
Yeah. I think the board broke in the middle when one kid jumped on it and it flew up right at, face level.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Trip to the emergency room from the brick catapult. And it's fun to hear my son, now that he's 19 and he's grown up, to recount this story of I don't know what we were thinking.
Did he come out with a cool scar at least?
Yes. That he got from the brick
where is
catapult.
The scar?
I think it's in his eyebrow.
Oh, that's awesome. Because now he's got that great story when he's trying to pick up chicks at the I guess he wouldn't be at a bar, would he? When he's trying to pick up chicks at the Sunday barbecue, I guess.
At the Cougar Eat, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. It's like, where did you get that scar? Oh, this scar? Oh, this is the scar that I got fighting that bobcat, saving that toddler in the stroller. It was a heck of a day.
That pretty much.
Well, go ahead.
I was going to say that pretty much exhausts my list of stupid rules in my house. I mean, I have a few more, but those are the main ones.
But that's excellent because this goes perfectly. This last anecdote you gave goes perfectly to the question that I have written down because you are not getting away with this. I must know about the family student housing at BYU.
Okay. So, all right, I'm going to delve full-blown into Mormon culture here for a minute, but I'm not going to call it Mormon culture because we've been getting in trouble lately. It is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And
you guys aren't Mormon anymore? Is that politically incorrect?
Mormons is a colloquial nickname, but the prophet has asked that we emphasize the fact that we have the name of Jesus Christ in the name of our church. And I know
that, but it's just shorthand, I thought.
It is. They've asked us to get away from that. So I've done my diligence.
There's your due diligence. I'm going to continue to call you Mormon.
Fine. And so at the church-sponsored university, one of the church-sponsored university in Provo, we live by the honor code. I don't know if you're familiar with the tenets of the honor code, but they're slightly more restrictive than the usual church dictates and doctrines. Of living what we call the word of wisdom, which is our health code, which prohibits alcohol and coffee and tea and tobacco, and then modesty regulations that require us to wear below the knee length shorts and skirts and cover our shoulders and other body parts, and they also require men to shave. Sometimes for single students there's curfews, but they're also highly encourage you once you've returned from your 2-year missionary service to get married. So much so that a lot of students take this very seriously, as I did, and get married, well before they've finished college and have already started a family and started having children before you graduate. So, and any university, I don't know what the percent is, of dormitories where it's like single student dormitories. Well, at BYU, I'm just throwing a wild, completely made up statistic out there, but it feels like it's at least half or more than half of the students there are married and have started families. So they have basically dormitories that cater to the needs of young families with children.
Okay. So, and I figured that's what it was, but I just had to bring it back because that is so alien to my college experience, because I think I had this is weird because it's not like a polar opposite. It's kind of along the same lines, but almost orthogonal. Like, I
totally get it.
Yeah, I went to the Air Force Academy, and you talk about, we have this honor code, and I'm rolling my eyes like, yeah, I have an honor code too.
Yeah, say it. Say the Air Force Academy honor code.
We will not lie, steal, or cheat, or tolerate among us anyone who does. So, and that was incredibly serious and taken very seriously. Like, if you were caught in any kind of a lie, like, I'm not going to say little white lies, but like if you lied to somebody and were called out on it, that was a dischargeable offense. Like, they could kick you out for that. There were people that were like, you don't incur a commitment until your junior year. So there were like juniors and seniors that would be caught violating the honor code. Like, they would plagiarize something for a paper or copy off of another student or something like that. If they were caught,
it feels like every other year you guys have like a full-blown crisis of whatever happened that week that someone violated the honor code.
So don't say you guys when you refer to the cadet wing of the Air Force Academy. I try not to associate with those.
I feel like there's collateral damage just from being in the Air Force for whatever some stupid college student did out in Colorado Springs.
There can be, but I mean, it's. I mean, that's a whole other topic. But like, and you're talking about your the appearance regulations. It's like I had to wear a uniform 7 days a week, clean shaven, obviously. Like, it was a military academy.
Yeah, funny how much we had in common in our college experience.
Funny how much we had in common, but how wildly different it was, because obviously there was no family dorms at the Air Force Academy. In fact, it was a requirement that you were not only single but had 0 dependents. So if you had, you can be up to 23 years old and still go to the academy. So there were some students that had been prior enlisted, like they had whole lives and careers before they show up there to, get their degree and become an officer. And like, there was always these urban legends. Like, I never met anybody, so I couldn't point to anyone and be like, this guy did this. But there are the urban legends of, like, in the regulations, it's entirely appropriate that if you came to the academy with a wife and child, you could divorce your wife and legally disown all of your children. And then you, by the books, you're perfectly fine to attend the academy the entire 4 years. And then after that, like the day that you graduate, if you want to get married to that same woman and then readopt your children, you can absolutely do that. And that is 100% within the scope of the law.
So that's kind of an apocryphal way of doing that. Are you aware of that ever actually happening? That seems so completely alien that it never would actually happen.
There are urban legends of people introducing their, like on the graduation day, introducing their what used to be their commanding officer to their wife and children, that they were going to remarry and readopt. Like, again, I never saw it. I never knew anybody that did it, so I can't point and say this happened.
All right.
But all of the rules allowed it to happen.
So as those two systems have a lot in common and a lot not in common, we also have our own urban legends about how to live within the rules by doing something completely ridiculous.
Let me bring this up. There is also an urban legend about BYU students going to Vegas with their girlfriends.
That's where I'm going. Let me tell it.
Yes.
Okay. That's the one. So the rule is that while you're at college, you live the law of chastity, which means no sex with someone you aren't married to. So the urban legend is that, horny college-age students, as they are, who wanted to get laid, but who also wanted to stay fully within the auspices of the honor code, would pop in a car, drive down to Vegas, get married, screw each other's brains out, get an annulment, and go back up to school the following day, and have technically been fully within the rules of the honor code, but have utterly and completely trampled all over the spirit of what was intended.
Outstanding. And of course, that's one, I can see that happening.
Yeah, that feels a lot less apocryphal than the disowning your children so that you can go to the Air Force Academy.
I mean, yeah. First of all, why would anybody go out of their way to go to the Air Force Academy in the first place? Blows my mind. Oof. So yeah, like I agree with what you're saying. Like it seems like teenagers, like college-age teenagers, are a lot more likely to put in work and effort to get laid versus put in a lot of work and effort to go to school.
Right.
That makes a lot more sense.
So we had a couple of other topics we'd set aside that I think would probably be good to save till next time. You had some questions you want to ask me about kids development, and I want to talk to you about our fitness regimens. I'll talk about mine from my perspective as a member of the military, subject to the military fitness regulations, and you can talk about what you do now that you're a civilian. You don't have any of that pressure.
I get to do all the things I want and nothing I don't.
So next time we'll talk about our focus with our kids development and about getting fit.
Getting fit is harder than staying fit, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is definitely a good discussion to have. And for some reason, I can't help but think about this while you're talking about that. Our Bad at Magic podcast has very little to do with magic. It's very much a parenting and life as a middle-aged man conversation.
Yeah, but I still like the title. I think I'm going to stick with it anyway.
But it is definitely a good title. Like I said, I haven't been able to purge magic out of my system, and so I've been playing, and I'm just so bad at it now, Ben.
Well, good. What an appropriately named podcast. So we've had 5 episodes now. I think we've talked about magic in 3 or 4 of the 5.
I think we've mentioned it in 3 or 4 of the 5. Yeah.
We're growing a bit. Our viewership is, we've added a few new people each week, and I think now that we're listed on iTunes, we're starting to get some strangers that aren't just like our moms. So welcome to our new listeners. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, please check out our page on Facebook or go to our website, badatmagic.live. If you're feeling generous, please give us a rating on iTunes or whatever podcast platform that you're listening to the podcast on, and help us grow a little bit and maybe share with your friends. We'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. I encourage any new listener to go onto our Facebook page and leave just terrible, awful comments about how we're so bad, and we will absolutely ignore every one of them.
Or if you hear something that we were talking about and you want to have a discussion about it, bring it up. My wife always wants to correct me on things, so I tell her that's a place she can go and set the record straight, and it'll be in the public eye. Check us out, and thanks for listening. Go ahead.
My wife is really big on Facebook too. I wonder if I could convince her to start a spouses discussion on the Facebook about how her and Alicia can have discussions about how terribly wrong we are about everything we talk about. That would be fun.
Yeah, and I'd like to hear maybe Nicole try to convince Alicia why being at the top of the chain of command is better than just being co-chain of command.
Oh, easy, because I make stupid decisions.